Hello, I'm Ann Coulter. Welcome to my Substack. I am so excited about our guest today, the hero of anti-woke Upper East Side, New York. Many of my viewers may not be familiar with him, but oh my gosh, is Andrew Gutmann a hero? I will just say briefly, we're going to go through it bit by bit. He's a very wealthy, successful man. His daughter was at probably the premier private school, girls' school in America, the Brearley School. In April 2021, he wrote a letter to the Brearley School that is a tour de force against the wokeness. There is no pulling punches here. So thank you and welcome, Andrew.
Oh, yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
This letter, I was trying to watch some videos with you, so I could prepare while biking and things like that. And this is a video, and I don't think enough people are familiar with this letter. I mean, I'll tell you, everybody on the Upper East Side is. I go to a restaurant on the Upper East Side with a lot of the moms from the private schools. And this is just ripping through New York City. One of the things one of the moms told me was that I was asking her, why did this suddenly blow up in 2021? And she said, the mothers are more involved in their children's schooling. We know the teachers, we knew this was going on. Our kids, whatever, we'll try to insulate them. But what happened was during the COVID shutdowns, the dads heard what was being taught. And the dads blew up, because you're not the only one, though your letter is probably the most impressive. So my hat's off to white men for protecting their daughters. This letter, I did want to start just reading it and asking you to comment on some of it. So you begin, it cannot be stated strongly enough that Brearley's obsession with race must stop. By viewing every element, I'm jumping around here, by viewing every element of education, every aspect of history, and every facet of society through the lens of skin color and race, we are desecrating the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. Okay, go.
Yeah, well, let's see. Everything about Brearley changed after the summer of 2020. So my daughter had been there since kindergarten. So this was sixth grade at the time. And she was happy there. She had done very well academically and socially. We were happy. Now, you can always nitpick things about a school. You're paying a lot of money for these schools. So, we had a few things we could complain about, but we were not the kind of parents that were what we call the PETA parents, right? The pain in the ass parents. We actually never complained about anything. And here we are, right before school starts, the summer of 2020. So you had George Floyd, you had BLM, you had these Black at Instagram accounts that a lot of the private schools across the country had, where alumni, some going back a few years, some going back decades, had their complaints and grievances about their experience at these private schools. Really was one of the first to have one of these Instagram accounts. And as we were getting closer to that, Labor Day and school starting, and they started to send all these emails about DEI and all these other things, and everything about the school changed. This was also COVID time, so parents weren't allowed in the school, nobody was getting together. And we tried that whole school year to get other parents to speak up, because I know more than half of the families were not happy with what was the complete mission change of the school, and failed. Could not get other parents to speak up. They all said, okay, I should write a letter, I should send an email, I should call the head of school, I should call a trustee. No one would say anything. And when re-enrollment contracts came out in February-ish of that school year, and we decided not to re-enroll her, which was not at the end of the day really my wife's or my decision. It was really my daughter's decision, because she knew she wasn't getting the education that she wanted, that she deserved. It was a completely different school. There were many instances that conversations were shut off. She was the only one on one side of an argument, and they'd have to shut that off. So at that point, I said, look, somebody's got to try to do something here. Someone's got to try to light a fire here. And there's obviously enormous fear of people speaking out. I was not professionally cancelable. I didn't work at, a Goldman Sachs or a big law firm where I was worried about getting fired. And I said, okay, I'll take the hit. I'll write a letter. And I mailed it to all 656 families, never expecting it to be read by any other than those 656 families. And within, I mean, you kind of insinuated, within, I heard within about an hour of it hitting people's mailboxes, I think it had been texted to every private school family, in New York City. There were rumors, for example, that I only sent it to the white families. I mean, nonsense like that. And then it really just exploded in the media. Barry Weiss published it, and that got a lot of attention. Tucker Carlson wound up reading it on TV. I was on the cover of the New York Post that Sunday. So it was quite a whirlwind. But I never thought that would happen. Here I am. I just wrote this letter and mailed it out, and it happened.
It's a magnificent letter, and I'll get back to it in a second. I really do think people need to hear more from this letter. What separated the parents who agreed with you and didn't agree with you? One of the things that was odd, I noticed out Brearley, is half of the class are BIPOCs. And one of the ones quoted in, I don't know, a New York Post article who objected to your letter, you get at the end of his quotes denouncing you and calling you a racist, who is Black. So it's kind of a power move.
Yeah, I mean, look, what I know so much more about all this stuff. I mean, I've lived and breathed this now for the last 3 years, so I understand what Brearley was doing. I was under the assumption when I wrote the letter that they basically gotten bullied into this dramatic change after, again, George Floyd and BLM and this Instagram account. Now, what I know now is that this had been in place for a very long time. Okay, the reason I bring that up to answer your question is that the school had been, the right word really is indoctrinating families in what we will now call woke ideology or social justice ideology or progressive ideology for years before. And we all kind of dismissed this. So, my wife, who had been very involved, in the Parent Association, was asked to do, not mandated, but asked to do a 2-day session in what we would now call DEI or woke ideology or social justice, a year or two prior to 2020. And she didn't do it. She didn't, we kind of just said, okay, this is nonsense. And so, what we now know now is that they were trying to indoctrinate. It's not just the kids. It's the entire community. It's the teachers, it's the administrators, it's the alumni, it's obviously the trustees, and they probably started with the trustees because this had been going on for a very long time. So, I got not a lot of public support from Brearley families because they were terrified to do that, but a lot, private support, some of which, a few of those were, from Black families who also didn't like what was going on. But, I would say that the people that were on our side of this issue, it's obviously there are conservatives. There are very few conservatives at New York City private schools, and if there are any, they're pretty closeted and silent about it. You had a little bit of the Asian community that just was upset more of the anti-meritocratic aspect of the ideology. But mostly you had kind of people like us, political or not, that just knew this was, whether it was silly or whether it was nonsense or whether it was taking away from everything else they should be teaching. I don't know how many people really realize that this was this revolutionary ideology that was to tear down Western civilization, which we all now, I think, know that's what this is.
Yes.
But I think, there were a lot of people that said, what are they doing here? Again, this was really, as I wrote in the letter, this was an obsession with race. Everything was about race. Now they've switched a lot to the obsession with gender ideology, right? And they're, connected. But every single communication, every email, every class was incorporating what we now know is to be critical race theory.
Yes. Well, I've noticed a lot of the moms on the Upper East Side who have become activists, they used to be far left liberals. I mean, they'll talk to me about some of the events they used to go to, and it was just very, very rich liberals and very liberal. And man, they flipped. You pull out one card in the House of Cards and the whole thing collapses.
So, I mean, I was I was in a lot of these private parent groups fighting both on the kind of CRT issues, also on COVID restrictions, for kids during those couple of years. Mostly moms, overwhelmingly moms, a very small number of dads. Overwhelmingly, like you said, Democrats. A lot of them, half of them would have said they were Bernie Sanders supporters. And here they were they were, as we all say, mugged by reality with what was happening in the schools, both public and private, public with school closures over COVID, and then, with all this ideology. And they started to animate and, advocate for these changes. But we didn't have enough. We didn't have the numbers to actually make changes. And we still don't within the K through 12 world, and certainly within the private school world.
Okay, I want to read a little more from your letter, although you said a lot of things I want to talk to you about. I just want people to understand the magnificent human being we're talking to here. Jumping down a little, I object to the charge of systemic racism in this country and at our school. Systemic racism, properly understood, is segregated schools and separate lunch counters. It is the interning of Japanese and the exterminating of Jews. Systemic racism is unequivocally not a small number of isolated incidents over a period of decades.
Right. So, okay. So that section where I said we haven't had systemic racism since.
Yeah, let me continue that thought,
yeah.
actually. We have not had systemic racism against Blacks in this country since the civil rights reforms of the 1960s, a period of more than 50 years. To state otherwise is a flat-out misrepresentation of our country's history. If anything, I particularly like this sentence, Andrew, long-standing and widespread policies such as affirmative action point in precisely the opposite direction. How can anyone disagree with this? This is just this phony indignation where the aggressors become the victims. I'm sorry, you go.
Yeah, no, so, I mean, that's the section where I was criticized, of the people that actually read the letter. That was the section where I was really criticized, the most for it. How could you say we don't have systemic racism? And, a lot of people read that to say we don't have racism. I mean, you're never going to eradicate racism. But,
you're never going to eradicate anything.
Correct.
We're a country
Correct.
of 320 million people. Sorry, go ahead.
Correct. No, that's exactly right. But, I was objecting to the way they define systemic racism, which is what we maybe now call, disparate impact, which is that any differences by race, whether in grades or whether in SAT scores or whether in, income or wealth, is, de facto, evidence of racism.
You can watch complete episodes of Unsafe with Ann Coulter by subscribing to anncoulter.substack.com. That's anncoulter.substack.com. You can also listen to complete episodes for free at Ricochet.com. Choose Unsafe from the pull-down menu at the top of the page. That's Ricochet.com, your home for civil center right conversation on the web.